Hello, everyone, and welcome back to 33 Voices. Nowadays, it's really difficult to talk about business or operational excellence at any level without mentioning Amazon. And I'm delighted today to be joined by two veterans of Amazon, Colin Breyer and Bill Carr, who between them have nearly 3 decades inside the big Seattle machine. And fortunately for all of us, they share their experiences in their new book, brilliant new book, Working Backwards, which, as you will learn, is actually a method. So, gentlemen, great to be with you.
Well, thanks for having us on the show.
Great to be here.
I have to start by asking a personal question to each of you, because I know the old saying goes, we shape our houses and then they shape us. So I am really curious, how has the experience inside of Amazon at such a pivotal point in the company shaped each of you personally or professionally?
I'll go first. That's okay. I don't mind that. So I joined Amazon in March of 1998, and there were about 100 people in the corporate group, and then there were 500 people in the fulfillment centers, and there's 2 fulfillment centers at the time, one in Seattle, one in Delaware, and then customer service group. So it was a very small company, but even then I felt that something special was going on. Had no idea it would turn into what Amazon is today, and I honestly don't think anyone did at that point. If you could project to see, what it would be approaching $500 billion in revenue and almost $2 trillion market cap. But I from the first moment I walked into the office, I could sense that there's a palpable sense of energy, and it was around just delighting customers, customer focus. It was a different way of running companies than I'd ever seen. And so how it has changed me as both the long-term thinking about building something that you want to be proud to tell your grandkids about. Early on, I felt that there's a chance that I would be telling my grandkids, I don't have any yet, about this experience. And then just how to get there with the customer obsession and the long-term thinking and the invention. We were in a brand new area, and so we knew we would have to invent a lot. And then just how much attention to detail, how much Amazon had paid attention to the little details to get those things right. That's what made it special for me, and it's actually morphed my career and thinking of how to build and run organizations since I've left Amazon.
Bill, how about you?
Yeah, in my case, I joined the company in 1999, and when I came in, I'd had a mix of experience at large, established public companies like Procter & Gamble, and I'd worked at a little startup, tech startup of 50 people. And I found that Amazon was like this amazing marriage of kind of both cultures in some ways, where it strove for, it thought and sought to establish processes and practices and standards like a company that had been successful for decades like P&G, while being smart, scrappy, and moving fast like a startup, which I thought was like a fantastic combination. And the energy of the people at the company, the passion, the smarts, the way that we were all committed, working towards well, we thought we were changing the world. And, this combination, frankly, brought out the best in me. It was an amazing career experience. It was an extremely challenging place to work because the standards were incredibly high. And we set those high standards because we were trying to meet the demands of our customers, and they are perpetually dissatisfied no matter what you do. They'll always want more. But that was great. That was invigorating to be, always working on their behalf and feel that pressure. I felt it was like sort of a great responsibility, but also a great honor to basically go invent and work on their behalf to try to, make for a better online experience, shopping experience for them.
You and I spoke briefly about this, Colin, before Bill joined on, that there's so much written about Amazon and from people inside and outside. What do the outsiders not know about the company?
Well, I would say that what everyone knows at this point is that Amazon is an extremely successful company and has built an incredible set of innovative products, from the Kindle to the Echo and Alexa to Amazon Web Services to retail experiences where you walk out without using a cashier. They know that the company is known for being delivering a great customer experience. These things are the things people know. What people don't really know is all of the work that went on behind the scenes to actually build a set of a way of working, a way of thinking, a way of managing the company that's enabled it to actually be so successful and so operationally excellent across and innovative across so many different businesses that have become so large and have grown around the world. And so that's what we really write about in our book, Working Backwards. That's the secret that we're sharing with the world, is that Amazon has created this set of processes and practices that they've perfected and that they obviously work. They're proven because they hammered them out over many years, and that these are accessible to anyone. Any business can actually learn from Amazon and use these principles.
Anything you want to add to that, Colin?
Yeah, just a lot of people say, well, Amazon can do that because they're Amazon, either have unlimited resources or they're a big company. And for most of the things Amazon does, that's not true. It is this invention machine that Bill had talked about, and that these things were created starting from using small groups and small teams. Then the other area where I've seen Amazon be misunderstood is that Jeff Bezos in particular thinks extremely long term, and people get that thinking long term confused with it's going to take you longer to achieve your goal. So what I've found firsthand is that thinking long term often gets you to where you want to go faster. And the one reason is that you're not distracted by short-term things and veering off path, and then you have to zig one way and zag back onto the path. And so if you keep your long-term focus, you're going to get to where you go more often than not faster. And an example of that would be Amazon being the fastest company from 0 to $100 billion in revenue. A second example would be Amazon Web Services went from 0 to $10 billion in revenue faster than Amazon, the company, did. And those were both created with long-term focus in mind. And you can make incredible progress by thinking long-term.
Obviously, Jeff made an announcement a couple of weeks ago about his transition to executive chairman. You had a front row seat, Colin, in working with him as his shadow. I think second, Andy was first and you were his second individual to shadow him. How, in your eyes, has he evolved as a leader?
Jeff has evolved as a leader. One thing is he became a much better operator. And, he was off the charts in terms of customer focus and customer experience. But learning to be a good operator, being a good operator was something that he had to learn. And there were great operators, fortunately, at Amazon, like Jeff Wilke, who just stepped aside as the CEO of Amazon's consumer business, and, a host of other people around Jeff and that leadership team. So I saw Jeff grow into being a world-class operator. And what's encouraging about that is, and we talk about some of these things in the book, to be operationally excellent and crisp, this is a teachable and learnable skill. It's sometimes difficult. You have to pay a lot of attention to detail.
A lot of times difficult.
Yes, but that this is something that you can pick up. You can't tell someone how to be taller or work. They're already probably working as hard as they can. So working harder often doesn't work. Or be smarter. You have what you have, but you can figure out how to be a better operator. So I would say that was the biggest one of the bigger changes that I saw in Jeff in his evolution.
And as you kind of survey the leadership landscape today, obviously that's a prerequisite to growing any side company. If you guys were looking to hire people to develop as great operators, what do you look for?
Well, great operators are made, not born. So they don't come out of the womb that way. If I'm looking for a great operator, I'm going to conduct an interview with a lot of behavioral questions, looking for examples in the past where they have set high standards for operations. And so what I'd be looking for specifically would be, number one, examples of where they have looked at a situation, either an existing process or someplace where there was a lack of process, and they identified that whatever that current process was that it wasn't working well enough, it didn't meet high enough standards, and that this person had then established or created a new process or revised the process to meet their high standards to ensure higher level of quality, lower level of failure, more efficiency, whatever the most processes have all of those goals. I'd be looking for good examples of where that leader had dug into the data and the details of a specific operation or a specific process flow, and been able to identify based on data issues, flaws, or problems in that process or flow, and then be able to use data to come up with specific improvements to it. I'd be looking for someone who's obsessed with, who has understands and is probably experienced with the concepts of Six Sigma and has mastered them. I'd be looking for someone who has, incredibly high standards, and thinks in terms of scale and how to, and has examples from their past work experience of where they have taken some problem or process and applied some new thinking or process to be able to make that, make it scale infinitely, upwards or globally, horizontally, whatever direction is necessary.
I would just be looking for someone who passed that interview with Bill.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, Colin, did you get the sense that in your role with Jeff during that time, that was something that he was focused on to make sure that he transfers to you?
Well, part of the role of being Jeff's technical advisor was making him a better CEO. But then another thing that he put to me at the beginning, I wanted to figure out what the success criteria was where we could model each other's thinking, because it's meant to be a temporary role and you go somewhere else in the company. So he wanted me to get a good idea of how he was thinking of structuring and running the organization, and then where I would go and do that. And he didn't have to be around while I was making all of those decisions. But where Jeff, during the time I was working with him, where he's focused the bulk of his effort was instrumenting the company, or making sure that the company had the right tools so it could grow, 10x to 100x in scale in a way that's where it still remained true to its roots and nimble, customer focus, and operationally crisp. So he put a lot of effort into how to do that. And that was work that doesn't really get noticed outside of the company. And then the second area where he put a good chunk of his time were in the biggest future opportunities, which weren't necessarily and they weren't the biggest businesses because they both had revenue of zero at the time. One was Amazon Web, what would become Amazon Web Services. The term cloud computing had not even existed then, but he was spending several hours a week working with Andy Jassy and his team and defining what would eventually become S3 for storage and EC2 for compute, those, two fundamental building blocks of cloud computing. And then the other one was working with Bill and Steve Kessel to how to transform Amazon's physical retail business, which was 77% of its business at the time, shipping physical books, CDs and DVDs, and even some VHS tapes. That a good chunk of that was going to go digital, very different business. And, spending time to figure out, well, what does that business really look like for customers? What's the customer experience that we have to create? And what skills does Amazon need to acquire in order to cannibalize the largest business that Amazon had to move into the digital space? So those were the focus areas for Jeff when I was working with him. And then something that I took away was working on your biggest opportunities and then always focusing on the process of how your organization makes decisions and how it can grow and stay nimble and true to its roots.
There was a period of time, guys, between, I think, 97 and 98 and 2000, 2001, when you guys both were there and Amazon experienced this massive growth, right? I think it was a $150 million company before that. And at the end of 2001, you guys had done $3.1 billion, right? 21X, I believe, is the number. That's an inventive machine. What was it like during that 4-year? I mean, to have that level of massive growth, I'm curious what it was like for people that were not only inside the company, but people who were in leadership positions inside the company.
It was kind of a combination of excitement because you knew you were part of something special, something that you were lucky to be a part of this, and this does not happen every day. So excitement. It was chaos at times. So when you're growing that fast and you have not had time to put in place the right processes and systems, and you're just trying to chase, you've got a tiger by the tail. Well, the tiger is going to bite from time to time. And so it was really challenging at times. It was, for example, in 99, we opened up, I think it was 4 new fulfillment centers. Each one was several 100,000 square feet. And I'm no expert on managing a fulfillment center, but someone told me one time that the traditional sort of ramp up or burn in time for a fulfillment center like that is about 9 months. And we opened them and, like 2 or 3 months later, we were hitting the holiday peak of orders. And so we all, most of us in Seattle had to drop at drop of a hat. Our managers would come in and hand us a plane ticket and say, you're going to the fulfillment center in Kentucky or Nevada or wherever for until Christmas is over to help, pick, pack, and ship boxes, which was both, exciting. And when you got there, these were not well-run, operations at that time. So it was a little chaotic and crazy. It was a work in progress. So, now the company run, in the years that follow, we would figure out how to, run like a Swiss watch. But when you're growing that fast, it is a real challenge to sort of, to keep up with that. And it was an incredible experience.
And I would add from the software, I was working in a software group at that time. There was no software you could buy that would handle the volumes that we were doing. So we had to figure out how to build software, deploy it in a way. It's a bit like, we said, you start at one end of the lake on a rowboat in the middle of the storm, and you want to end up with a big aircraft carrier on the other side, and you have to pedal, get faster as you're going along the way. So we had to figure out how to build a lot of these things. And we did make a lot of mistakes too. I think that we relied a lot on individual heroics, and that can work up to a certain point, but ultimately it's not going to scale. And so we learned how to bottle up some of these things and turn them into repeatable, scalable processes after that experience, the rapid experience of growth.
Well, and out of that, one of the tenets that at least that we all hear from the outside emerged, right? The two pizza rule, as well as the single threaded leadership, which still kind of anchors a lot of what goes on inside Amazon today. Walk me through that evolution of that.
So we were adding a lot of software engineers at the time, and we found out we were still moving at the same speed or even slower. It was taking longer and longer to build and deploy software, and we were doing more coordinating and then communicating than actually building things. And a lot of companies would take a look at that and say, okay, how can we get better at collaboration? Let's build some processes, coordination and communication processes. And Jeff said just the opposite. Let's not do that. Let's try to eliminate it altogether. How can we have these small teams work? And it wasn't in complete isolation. We used the term loosely coupled. Otherwise, it would be 1,000 individual independent companies. We didn't want that. We wanted to get some of the economies of scale, but you also wanted to move fast. And so, what we started on the road, it was building these. We call them two pizza teams at first, and that was just because the size that two pizzas would be enough to feed the size of the whole team. So 6 to 12 people would be the maximum size. If the team got bigger than that, you wanted to cleave that area in two and separate those and have those two separate teams be able to move individually. There were some elements of the two pizza team that didn't make it. We talk about a lot of these Amazon processes, or what people often read about them is if they came out fully formed. They didn't. We were experimenting along the way. We made lots of mistakes and we tweaked things. There are things about the two pizza team that dropped off. We had these things called fitness functions, which are basically a single composite metric that you could use to measure the progress of every two pizza team. We realized we were spending so much time figuring out what that composite fitness function metric was and not building stuff. So we stopped doing that part. But ultimately what became important was having a single leader, we call it a single-threaded leader, whose sole focus is to lead this area and have largely separable teams. And a good example of where that came to light was there was a project called Self-Service Order Fulfillment at Amazon, which was how do you take Amazon's logistics capabilities and expose it to third parties. And it was a great idea, but it was always seemed to be number 8 or 9 on the priority list, and no progress was being made. The leader or the group would always change. Jeff and I would come in and do a self-service order fulfillment review. There'd be a different person giving the review 6 weeks later. And Jeff realized, hey, this is so important. And he turned to Jeff Wilke. Jeff Bezos turned to Jeff Wilke and said, I want you to assign someone, a senior leader, to work on this and only this until this is done. And Jeff Wilke turned over to Tom Taylor, who is a vice president in the logistics group. He had a big job and asked Tom to say, okay, stop what you're doing and figure out how to make SOF a reality. And SOF, self-service order fulfillment, eventually became what's now called Fulfillment by Amazon, which is essentially the glue between Amazon's marketplace business and Amazon Prime. And it's a huge part of the growth of Amazon, the company. But it would never have gotten off the ground if it didn't have a single threaded leader. And so we took that concept and asked the question, if there's an important thing that's worth doing, it's who is the senior most person in the organization whose job is this and nothing else but this. And if it turns out it's no one, or if it's someone who doesn't have the skill set or capability or authority and autonomy to get it done, then you've got to change your organization and organize around how to do this. So that is how it evolved from two pizzas to single-threaded leaders, and it was a journey and lots of mistakes along the way, but and a few successes.
And I think the best part, probably, when people have each of you on their teams, neither of you look like you eat any pizza at all. So it probably went to all the other people, right? Bill, I want to get.
I do like pizza.
Do you? Well, what do you? Maybe it's that Peloton that helps you get rid of it really quickly. Right?
I also am an avid road cyclist. So, yeah.
Well, I want to get to you for a moment because I know that you were part of the team that has built Amazon Prime Video as we see it today, right? The early days are totally different than what we see today. And a lot of people talk about the successes of that. But I want to talk about the failures. I want to talk about the missteps. What do you take away when a project that big inside Amazon doesn't work? What do you do with the learning?
Well, I'm flattered that you decided to ask me about the failure part and not Colin, but
in the end, you're a hero.
So one of the great things about Amazon's culture is that they, Jeff and the company leadership recognize that if you are going to invent, step out on a limb, try new things, that many of these new things aren't going to work. In fact, any sort of new experiment or that you're going to conduct, if you know how the experiment's going to turn out, that's not an experiment. There's risk, and that one of the features that attracted me and kept me at the company was that it encouraged risk taking, and if you took a risk that was well thought out, and had actually executed the product well, that you weren't punished for this. It was recognized that this wasn't a failure of an individual. It was a fact of life that not everything is going to work out well. Now, to be clear, I also had more than my fair share of failures where in some cases it wasn't as well thought out as it should have been, and nor was it executed as well as it should have been. And so, and what is not really excusable is to repeat those mistakes. And so when you make any kind of failure, your obligation at Amazon is to clearly understand and document what went wrong, whether it was, a failure in decision-making, a failure in process or execution, or just we had this idea, this product, and it did not, we did not achieve product market fit for whatever reason, but to understand why it didn't. And in any of these cases is to document it, and communicate that broadly to people so that everyone in the organization can learn from that and benefit from your mistake. Most successful leaders and most successful entrepreneurs have failed many times, and I would argue that most of your people's best learnings comes from failure and what they take away from their failures and move forward. So yes, the great thing about Amazon was that, for example, when I would fail or someone else would fail, Jeff would say something to the effect of, why would I fire you now? I just made an X $1 million investment in you in the form of whatever this failure was. And so for this investment to pay off, I need to keep you here so that you can learn from that and pay it forward. And when I think about the very first version of Amazon Video that we launched, which was called Unbox, and it could be a long story to describe all the ways in which that didn't do well, the kinds of lessons that I took away from that failure, I would say had directly impacted my ability and our team's ability to then succeed later.
But you're also very self-critical of yourself. You share in the book an example of your own performance, and you share explicitly how you shared it. And I think that's a testament to your own leadership, right? Hey, I screwed up, and there wasn't the 2 or 3 paragraphs that you shared. There wasn't anything in there that was positive. So I'm curious, how does that conversation work after you share that either with a leader and or with Jeff? What's the dialogue like inside of that?
Well, I feel a little bit like I'm on the couch now, and we're getting into the fact that I'm overly self-critical, but which is true.
But rarely do you see that, Bill. Typical.
Yeah, but to flip it. But let me say something that is self-serving. So, if you read Jim Collins' book Good to Great, he talks about there the 2 most important concepts that I take away from that book. Number 1 are the flywheel concept, sure, which Amazon embraced fully and really describe that in the book about how that impacts Amazon's approach to focusing on inputs to the system, input metrics, not output metrics. But more importantly, in the back, as I recall, he talks about leadership. And unless I'm going to screw it up, I believe he termed the phrase a level 5 leader.
Yep.
For the best leaders. And what a level 5 leader did is when something went wrong, I guess a level 4, or as I recall it,
or 3,
or 3 would look out the window, blame the problem on the economy, the competition. It was never, that leader's fault or their company. It was always some external force that was a result of their problem. But the level 5 leader, when something went wrong, they look in the mirror and they examine carefully, what did I or we do as a company wrong here from a process point of view, from a people point of view, from a decision-making point of view that has put us in this place, and how can I learn and improve, learn from this and move forward. So I did my best to embrace that. And I think that the many leaders, that was shared by most leaders at Amazon.
Colin, you were part of the evolution of the famous narrative now that, again, all of us outsiders appreciate about Amazon. All right, I think Jeff and you were reading an article on a plane from one of our favorite people as well, Edward Tufte, about the importance of communication, and that has evolved. Describe to me what an outstanding narrative looks like.
It is something that you know it when you see it, you read it, and it's where the clarity of thought really jumps from the page, and you realize that this idea has been analyzed from many different angles, and the story of telling what the idea is and making a recommendation, and saying, what was my second best idea, and why did we discard that? Because these narratives are usually authored by more than one person. It's a team that authors that. So it's the clarity of thought, and that really just pops out from the page. Those are the narratives that really sing and shine. And by the way, some of those narratives that fall into that category were written by people whose second language was English, whose first language is something other than English, and it's just getting that clarity of thought right, and that's, I would say, first and foremost, is what separates a great narrative from just a good narrative. It's pretty easy to tell that and it doesn't happen too often, if a team just spent the night before writing a narrative and then you review it that day, you can just tell that they didn't spend enough time on it, and it's not ready for prime time, and you stop that meeting early and say the time's more productive to go, for the team to go back and rework this. That doesn't happen too often. It's very easy to tell a poor one from a good one, but it's harder to tell a good one from a great one. How
did you guys become great at it?
Practice is one. And, if you looked at the first sets of narratives, some people were just copying and pasting PowerPoint bullets into a Word document and adding a few more words. So just practicing is one. Allocating enough time to get these things done, because you have to write and rewrite them several times. So, that is another one. And then once there was a body of great narratives, it didn't really matter what the subject was. They got passed around to other groups in the company to say, here's a shining example of what clarity of thought really means. And it sets the bar. And that way, when you write your own narrative, it can be in a completely different area. Where you rank in terms of clarity of thought. And so I think that once Amazon started to build up this critical mass of what they were, what a great narrative was, it became easier to know what the end goal was. And forcing it to 6 pages is also a great function, because you could write and ramble on and there may be some nuggets of good thought, but forcing it to 6 pages and forcing the meeting into an hour really makes you focus on the most important things and the salient features of whatever idea or proposal that you have.
And this is not exclusive just to Amazon. I mean, Colin and I both have worked elsewhere and since then. And I was the chief operating officer at OfferUp, and I brought the narrative process there. And it was the exact same evolution. The first ones weren't so good. Then you got a couple of examples like, aha, okay, this is what a monthly business review is supposed to look like. Show this to all of your peers and use this as the format to use from now on. One of the coolest things about how people, when you can learn from your peers and stand on the shoulders of others, like that's really how we make so much progress. And one of the ways in which I learned so much at Amazon was just from my peers who, in so many different ways, whether it was a great narrative, a great new process they invented, a new way of thinking of things. Each one of these things allows you to sort of step up your own game, because you just take this thing you've learned from someone else and then you add it to your arsenal. So the narrative process was no different, and like Amazon, within, I don't know, 4 or 5 months, people at OfferUp are writing good narratives too.
When we started this, before we started the podcast, you asked, well, are there some things that people don't really understand or that don't make it out about Amazon? I think one of the things with narratives is how to read them and how important the reader is and the commenter is on the narrative process, because Amazon meetings with narratives start off with 20 minutes of reading and you write in your comments, but then there's 40 minutes of high quality discussion. So the end goal is not writing the narrative. The end goal is making the right decision. And there's 40 minutes of hard work, that the audience or the people in the room or on the Zoom call have to contribute to take what the team that authored the narrative, to take that idea and elevate it to something better. And so it's you have to go into it with critical thinking, ask great questions, look at the narrative from different angles, and your goal is to make the right decision or leave the meeting with a better idea than what the team brought. And so there's a big responsibility for the readers and commenters too. It's not just the narrative. So don't make the narrative the proxy itself. The narrative is a tool to make great decisions.
I think that's a great point, and I appreciate you bringing that up, especially when you talk about decisions. Jeff is often quoted as saying, I get paid to make 4 or 5 really important decisions a year. And, when he started articulating that, a lot of people didn't know what he meant. But when you start to really observe what's happened, that really is how he manages things. And he talks about working in the future. And he talks about the 2 levels of decisions. How do leaders inside Amazon get good at making the right decisions? Because you guys are also tasked with wanting to be right a lot.
Well, one way is that you end up making, if you have to make a lot of decisions, it's really like anything else, which is time at task. And one of the great things about working at Amazon was that things were moving so fast and there was so much growth, and there were so many, Colin referenced earlier in the conversation, we'd be working on e-commerce. You couldn't hire someone who was an e-commerce expert. There was no such thing back in 1999. So you had to figure it out, which meant you were making a lot of decisions through uncharted, territory. And so I do think it's like, if I had to give advice to anyone early in their career, put yourself in a situation in a high growth, highly ambiguous company, because then you'll be forced to make a lot of decisions and or observe a lot of decisions. It's not really about every time that you as a leader have to do so, but in many cases at Amazon, the other way we got good at it was that, and I've come to realize in the intervening time in terms of working with other companies, that most CEOs don't and leaders don't realize that it's very wise to actually have, even if you're making a marketing decision, it's wise to actually have the other leaders in the company in the room to participate in that decision, because they're getting practice at how to make that decision. And by the way, they're better informed about what's going on in the company broadly. So Jeff and Amazon did this by structuring a lot of meetings where there were long blocks of time where important topics would come to a broad set of leaders. And in most cases for Jeff, that was him and the S team, his direct reports. And anything of any kind of importance would be brought to this team. It didn't matter if it was a technology issue or a marketing issue or an operations issue. And, even if you were a lawyer in your general counsel, you'd be asked to weigh in on, what do you think about this marketing problem? And so create a culture in your company where many people are involved. It doesn't mean that everyone gets to make the decision. There's still a decision maker in the meeting. If you're the CEO in the meeting, you're the decision maker, or you may, as much as possible, try to delegate and rely on, if it's a marketing decision, you want the marketing leader to make that decision. You just want to decide whether you agree with that decision or maybe want to modify it. So it's about creating a culture of how do you practice and how are you making a lot of decisions. And then finally, as we talked about earlier with the narrative process, it's about how do you bring a lot of data and information to the process so you're making the best decision possible.
I think that's spot on. I would just add, from an individual perspective, when you're looking at how do I make these decisions, a good question to ask up front is, am I going through a one-way door or a two-way door? And if you're going through a two-way door, it's a different tool set that you need to bring with you, and course correcting, quite honestly, is probably more important than making the right decision. You want to go through that door, move fast, and be able to detect where you are and course correct and move in the right direction. Whereas for the one-way door, you want the tool set is more, okay, let me measure twice and cut once, because once I make this decision, it's going to be painful to reverse that. So just asking up front, what type of situation is this? It just opens up a different perspective into how you're going to proceed. And, I think one common mistake is people use the same decision-making framework for different classes of problems. And you need to have a different decision-making framework for one-way doors versus two-way doors.
Jeff Bezos talks about the one-way door is a type 1 decision and the two-way door is a type 2 decision, meaning the one-way door is almost irreversible, like the fire. The two-way door was something that both of you guys have dealt with. Certainly you have dealt with the digital component where you learn and you adjust accordingly.
Yeah, and one-way doors are hard or expensive to go back through. So you want to really think through those decisions. But a simple example of a two-way door is when Amazon decided to stop using PowerPoint meetings and start using documents. If that hadn't worked after a couple of weeks, you could have just gone back. So it's not that big of a deal. There are a lot of decisions like that.
All right. Well, I want to ask you guys two more questions and I'll let you go. You mentioned something, Bill, that I think a lot of times a lot of people just glance through when you talk about managing inputs versus managing outputs. I have found that is a tremendous way to manage executives, is really understanding the inputs, not dismissing the outputs. But talk to me a little bit about what happens when your attention focuses on the inputs rather than outputs, which is what most people focus on.
Well, the important thing about inputs is actually there are two other words I put with it: controllable and customer facing. So, Amazon has this unshakable conviction, as Jeff said, that the interests of shareholders and customers are completely aligned, which is his way of saying, look, if we do a great job of serving our customers, I, Jeff, have faith that the end investors, Wall Street will be made happy because the end result will be good revenue, good free cash flow, good growth. And so to do that, you need to focus on the things that you actually control to make the customer experience better. And the simplest example to give is just thinking about Amazon's retail business, that there are three components to that, which are really true of any retail business, which are what's the breadth of selection that you have available to you? How great are the prices for those? How competitive or low are the prices for those products? And how easy or convenient is it for you to obtain that product, whether that's driving to a store that might be nearby and have convenient parking and fast checkout and easy to find the product on the shelf, or order from Amazon and get it in, a couple of days or a couple of hours. And so the easier it is, the easier and faster it is to get it, the better. And so Amazon focused on realized that, it doesn't matter whether it's $19.99 or $20.99. Customers will always still care about being able to choose from the broadest selection of products at the lowest prices that they get conveniently. And so literally from the time that Colin and I arrived there and still true today, that's what the retail business works on. And what the company figured out is to go deep below the level of each one of those inputs, those metric, the input of, the company can control what the prices are. The company can control how many items they have to offer, and the company can control how fast it is they get it to you. And then coming up with a series of metrics underlying each one of them. Like, for example, if you're trying to measure how fast you get it to customers, you might measure, well, what % of the time when we've promised the customer that it's 2-day delivery, do we actually achieve 2-day delivery? And many, many other detailed metrics around that. So by having that sort of detailed and maniacal focus on all those input metrics, and then coming up with, over time, testing each one, figuring out which one, if I push on this metric or try this initiative to move that metric, does it work, does it not work? Then, over a course of months, years, and decades, you're just going to get, you're going to produce good results if you're working on the right atomic level inputs to your business.
And that works for us as individuals, as well as, companies and leaders and executives and so forth. And, part of that obviously is making sure that you guys have the right people. Colin, you and I briefly talked about the importance, again, regardless of what size business that you're in, about the type of people you associate with yourself with, right? Part of the 14 leadership principles that they're online, and certainly you guys talk in detail about them in the book, is the whole idea of the bar raiser. How do we make sure that at all times you are hiring the missionaries that Jeff talked about? Put in perspective to me the importance of that. Again, so many people and companies talk about hiring and talent density and so forth. You guys lived it every day.
So the first thing is that for any organization, even if you're just starting out and you have 1 or 2 people, you need to define who you are, what are the core leadership principles that make you unique, your organization unique. And as the organization grows, you're going to have to hire people. And you want a deliberate hiring process to say, is this new person coming in, will they embody and reinforce the culture and the leadership principles that we have as an organization, or are they going to detract from that? If you don't have a deliberate hiring process that asks that question up front, when you go from 2 people to 5 to 10 to 20, that's where you lose control over the culture of your company, how it operates. And, often we've seen organizations say, yeah, it just doesn't, it's not like it used to be. We either used to move faster, or it didn't used to be this political or, environment, or it didn't used to be X or Y. And you can trace that back to one of 2 things. One is that there wasn't a clear definition of leadership principles or core values, cultural values. Those are, companies use different terms for essentially the same thing, or that wasn't defined up front. Or the second thing is there wasn't a deliberate hiring process. So you'll get a culture when your organization grows. It's just, will it be the one that you want? And if it's the one that you want, you have to nurture it and attract people who reinforce that culture in a deliberate manner. So that is one of the things that the bar raiser process did. And it was meant to solve a specific problem in 1999, started in the technology group, where we had, this is the way John Vlastelica put it. He was an HR exec at Amazon. He said, we had new people hiring new people, hiring new people. And so when you get that, to that level, you're just, and you don't have a process, you've lost control over who's coming into your company. So Amazon, rather than relying on good intentions to say, this hire wasn't the best, just hire better next time, put in a process called the bar raiser process, which is, I won't go into all the detail, but it's actually a quite simple, lightweight process that's scalable, and it ensures that the people you bring on reinforce the company's leadership principles. There's also a functional skills component to it. But that was one of the first processes Amazon put in that changed individual efforts to a repeatable, scalable process. And it's actually one of the best ones too, that has allowed Amazon to stay true to its roots. I think that was put in when Amazon had done was $650 million is where they ended up in 1998. So, it was in 1999 when that process was implemented, and it's still being used today. Amazon's approaching, 1.3 million people and $500 billion in revenue. So that's a powerful process, and there's more detail and nuance into it and how it removes bias. But ultimately, it ensures that the people you bring on board reinforce your culture rather than change your culture.
Bill, let me just pick up on that really quickly. As part of the shift to digital, you guys had purchased a small French company that came in because they had the software you guys needed at least to fast track that. How do you get these outsiders to start embracing this thinking, and how quickly did that happen, if you remember?
Well, that was something we had, whether it was a company that we acquired or people that we hired, because, we were growing, the company has more than 1 million people today. And, we would be hiring, hundreds of people every month. You had to have a good way to help them, get up to speed. A bit of a shameless self-promotion is that, honestly, I've had a number of people come to me since we wrote this book to say, wow, this is great. I wish I'd had this the day I started at Amazon. It would have made it a lot easier to understand the company and get up to speed. So we didn't, intentionally write this book to serve the needs of new hires at Amazon, but I would argue that it certainly does. Candidly, it really is connected to the book, because as my position changed and my team grew over time, I found that a lot of what I was doing was teaching senior executives who, whether people had brought in from the outside, and you had to, because we were growing like a weed. At one point in a 3-year period, I believe my team went from about 150 to 1,500. And so I can't accomplish all that by hiring people out of college and business school and ramping them up. You have to hire some people at middle and senior management levels to fill out your organization. And so it was incumbent on me and other leaders at Amazon to help them understand the peculiar ways of the company and how do we do these things. So that was a lot of my time, was teaching. And I don't think there was a meeting I would sit in where if I was the most senior leader in the meeting, it was my organization, that there wasn't at least one moment of where I was coaching or teaching the company, whether it was about any of the many topics in the book and many others. So you have to think of yourself as that coach and teacher.
And you evolve, right? I mean, I think most people confuse the fact as a leader with, you mentioned Jim Collins' is Good to Great, where everybody talks about the who first.
Right.
You guys have really evolved that to where the who is actually last in the leadership process, right? That you first have to.
Yeah. And Jeff, the who is super important. And I remember there's one of the things that Jeff said that really stuck with me, that he said that as a startup CEO, you start off focused on what, and what being, what's this product I'm going to build? What is the service I'm going to build? Then how am I going to do it? What are our processes? And then who, or more to the point, that as you become more senior and move up in your role, in the company that really the who becomes more and more of an important decision, saying, if we're going to go do X, who am I going to delegate that to, and who's the right person, or what's the right, org structure to do that work. And that was true for me too. Certainly, as I think about, starting off in digital media, I spent a lot of my time early on like, well, what the heck are we going to build here in digital media? And then after we built it, how are we going to operate this to be effective? But then, yes, if I reflect on my last few years in the company, when the organization had become large and global, it was more and more about delegating specific responsibility to other leaders. And as I would, coach managers and leaders in my organization, which is the more senior they got, the less they had to stop doing what I called real work, by meaning that they couldn't be, they had to delegate appropriately the right work to the right people on their team and not try to do it for them. And that's why the who becomes so central.
And that's where you ask those questions by, if you grow 10x, what does the organization look like and how does it have to work? You realize that you will run out of hours in the week. There are only 168 of them if you have to make the key product decisions. As your group works, instead of 5 products, it's 15 and then 50 products, because you can't spend the amount of time and get to the amount of detail to make those right decisions. You have to organize and hire appropriately to do that.
Well, you guys have developed an amazing playbook, a toolkit, whatever you want to call it. You don't have to work inside Amazon. This is relative to a tiny company and for the people who are working at Google. So thank you for, one, your openness in sharing that, and more importantly, for giving us a glimpse of what greatness looks like.
Well, thank you, Mo, for inviting us here. It's been a great conversation.
Yeah, very fun. Thanks, Mo.